Hey soldiers, billionaire hedge fund investor Ray Dalio is out with a serious warning about relations between the U.S. and China. Now, this is all coming in the wake of Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. And since then, we've got even more U.S. lawmakers who have visited Taiwan, further straining relations between the two nations, two economic and military superpowers. Now, Ray Dalio has some serious and I think well-founded concerns with regard to the deterioration of the relationship, because it could have a tremendous negative effect on the global economy, especially right here in the U.S. It could make what happened in the wake of the Russia sanctions look like absolute child's play.
And the third is the rise of a great power to challenge the existing great power. In other words, I gave you the example of how the United States was so dominant in 1945. Now it's not as dominant. It is not dominant. In other words, China and the opposition is as strong as the United States and its allies. And so we have a conflict. And there are 5 kinds of wars. And they start in this order, just sequentially, typically. A trade war, a technology war, a geopolitical influence war. Then you get into a capital and economic warfare, which we are now with sanctions. They always happened in history. And then there's a military war.
Ray Dalio recently came out and spoke about economic implications of escalating U.S.-China tensions. Now, we all know that Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan about a week ago. And we know, well, more than a week ago at this point, but we know that China responded by conducting live fire military drills around Taiwan. They even fired some weaponry in the direction of Japan, a major U.S. ally. So China is, kind of fed up broadcasting that they do not like the fact that Taiwan is gaining more legitimacy as an independent nation, as opposed to what the U.S. has even said Taiwan is supposed to be, which is a part of China. Now, since Pelosi went over, we've had even more lawmakers, U.S. lawmakers, visit Taiwan. A delegation of American lawmakers arrived in Taiwan on Sunday. That's the 14th of August, just 12 days after a visit by U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi that prompted China to launch days of threatening military drills around the self-governing island that Beijing says must come under its control. And they're talking about, of course, Taiwan. So let's get into this, because we need to understand, if this is taken to the furthest extent and we get into an economic war with China like the one we're in with Russia, we're going to see how this could have greater implications and really damage the already fragile and flailing U.S. economy. The 5-member delegation that recently went over on Sunday, led by Democrat Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts, they're going to meet with President Tsai Ing-wen and other officials, as well as members of the private sector, to discuss shared interests, including reducing tensions in the Taiwan Strait and investments in semiconductors. Keep that in mind, that semiconductor piece. You need to do some due diligence on that. This conversation that we're having right now is made possible by semiconductors. We can't make a move in this country economically, socially, with regard to power or communications or commerce without the semiconductor. And these senators seem extremely interested in that particular piece of technology. So you can best believe that there is some investment potential there. Maybe. You got to do your due diligence. China responded to Pelosi's August visit by, of course, sending all the missiles and whatnot and doing the live fire drills. But, okay, so we've got more fuel being added to this fire. Just 12 days after Pelosi visited, here we have Senator Ed Markey, a high-ranking U.S. senator, taking some folk over and further poking this bear. Let's get to Ray Dalio and what he's talking about, because I think he lays his case out very succinctly. United States-China relations have taken a turn for the worse, with Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House of Representatives, visiting Taiwan earlier this month. With the clash of the two superpowers, the economic implications of this friction could be much worse than the Russia-Ukraine war, according to billionaire investor Ray Dalio. In a blog post this week, Ray Dalio explained how the global economy would suffer if relations between the two countries take a similar trajectory to the U.S.-Russia relations. Beijing is outraged by the move made by Washington. So if they were outraged by Pelosi, then they're double outraged now that Markey's over there, as it sees Taiwan as a part of China and not as an independent country. Now, a lot of people may be wondering, why is Taiwan so important? Taiwan is like the major producer of global semiconductors right now. Okay. Now, this is another example of how America has strategically disadvantaged itself by outsourcing critical pieces of our infrastructure. China produces a lot of very important medications for you that we use here in the United States. Now, can you imagine? They don't even need to fire a shot. This can be a total economic war and turn out to cripple the United States of America. They can just say, well, we're going to stop our shipment of penicillin. And that's just one of the many products that are essential to our modern life that we depend on China for. So we depend on Taiwan. And if you doubt that, just go look at every product made in your home. Make a little list and find out at the end of that list how many were made in China. Or Taiwan. Taiwan, being a major producer of semiconductors, is definitely in a position, if they are taken over by China, China can, make some moves that are detrimental to our economy. And the saddest, most perplexing part of this is that we've put ourselves in a position where, believe it or not, a lot of our defense infrastructure is reliant on chips that come from Taiwan. Wouldn't you think this would be something that we would produce, or at the least have it produced by one of our strongest allies? But no, that's not the case. Dalio is quoted as saying, if events continue to follow this path, this conflict will have a much larger global impact than the Russia-Ukraine war, because it is between the world's leading superpowers that are economically much larger and much more intertwined. Okay, so again, we just talked about penicillin. We just talked about semiconductors. Well, it seems like we're very dependent on them, and they are very dependent on the revenue they get from us for all of the China, that is, for all of the products that they produce and import here. Ray Dalio reinforced his argument, highlighting that China's share of world trade is over 7 times larger than that of Russia and constitutes about 19% of all American manufactured goods imported. Imagine if importing goods from China and doing business with China became the same as they are with Russia now. Imagine what the supply chain and economic impacts of the world would be, said Dalio. Imagine what sanctions on China would be like for the world. Supply chains would collapse, economic activity would dive, and inflation would soar. And that's just what would happen to economies due to economic warfare, which would pale in comparison to the impact that military warfare would have, which we are obviously dangerously close to as well. Now, inflation seems to be something that is an ever-present threat and is brought on by the way we are situated economically in the world, this interdependence that we have on one another as countries, as producers. Another thing I want you to keep in mind is that the Inflation Reduction Act has placed a tax on oil imports. Okay, so that's another reason why prices will remain high. Imagine this. The Inflation Reduction Act, okay, that's what it says, will raise inflation because it will add a tax onto imports of oil, which will be turned into fuels, diesel, which will then increase the price of transporting everything. your groceries to the grocery store, your kids to school, you to work, on and on and on and on, okay? Parts to manufacturers. So inflation, that Inflation Reduction Act is going to keep inflation high. And if we get into this economic war with China, you can best believe they have the power. Now, Russia placed sanctions on the U.S. in a token fashion. But as you've seen, with over 50% of our imports of penicillin being from China, they can certainly, impact us. Now, we can probably expect these military drills to continue because the U.S. is continuing to send dignitaries into Taiwan against the wishes of China. As a response to Nancy Pelosi visiting Taiwan, of course, China has been conducting multiple military drills around the island of Taiwan. The situation has escalated, and Ray Dalio believes the situation that now exists between the United States and China is very similar to that which existed between powers immediately prior to World Wars I and II, and many other immediate pre-war periods. His conflict gauge reading of the tensions between the two countries stands at 1.2 standard deviations. For context, the tension between the United Kingdom and Germany before World War I was at 1.3, according to the index. So the doomsday clock, look into that. I wonder where we are on the doomsday clock right now. Let me check. The doomsday clock is something that some scientists came up with to gauge how close we are to annihilation. This thing meant a lot in the 80s. Let's see what it says. The closer we are to midnight on the clock, the closer we are to atomic annihilation. Now, it is 100 seconds to midnight right now, and that's at this website. Let me show you this so you can get the URL and you can check it out for yourself. Okay, it's 100 seconds to midnight. All right, now we here at Soldiers of Finance, although the channel is called Soldiers of Finance, that means that we're soldiers in the war on poverty. We don't want to see military conflict anywhere in the world, although it seems as though humans have a definite predilection toward that type of conflict. War is a business that destroys lives. I like to see a strong defense among all countries because the more weapons we have, the less likely we are to go to war, especially if they're nuclear weapons. Same principle applies on the streets of Baltimore, where more and more people in the state of Maryland are becoming armed thanks to the recent Supreme Court decision. And so hopefully we will see a balance of power between the savages and those who are just trying to go about their business and live their lives. I think the same principle applies when you look at these major countries, especially a country like China. China is interested in its history, its future, and its people. Now, they have a whole different philosophy than the West. And a lot of that I disagree with, and that's fine. But there's a sort of mutually assured destruction. Same thing existed, same philosophy existed with the United States and Russia. We didn't want to use these powerful weapons because we knew that if we did, it would just destroy life as we know it here on the planet Earth. So hopefully everybody can calm down, cooler heads can prevail. We can all go back to making money and trying to be happy, okay, and trying to do things that enrich our individual selves, our families, and the world in general. All right, guys, take a look at this video right here. Mark Cuban, owner of the Dallas Mavericks, is talking about a piece of real estate you should never buy. All right, guys, I'll talk to you soon.